Good evening. It's Thursday, January 30th, 2025, and welcome to the 2025 Kamloops Exploration Lecture Series. My name is Chris Leclerc. Over the next couple of months, KEG is extremely excited to host presentations from many fantastic experts. Before we get started, I would first like to acknowledge that we are hosting today's talk within the unceded traditional lands of the Secwepemc Nation. This year's series will be hosted through a hybrid style with some online and some in-person events. As a not-for-profit organization, the Kamloops Exploration Group relies on sponsors to aid in hosting such events as this lecture series. Tonight, we would like to thank ALS for being the sponsor of the whole 2025 lecture series. As always, I would like to inform you that your microphones are muted and your video cameras are turned off. If you have any questions throughout the talk, we ask that you type them into the Q&A tab for the question and answer portion at the end of the talk. Moving on to tonight's speaker, we are honored to welcome back a great friend of the Kamloops Exploration Group, Dr. Robert Young. He has presented many times in the past, both in person and online. His expertise in sedimentation and geomorphology related to fossiliferous ice age fauna discoveries in North America is always a pleasure to witness. Every time I meet Rob, I learn something new. And I won't lie, we were chatting just before, and once again, I learned something new in 10 minutes before we just started this. Most of Rob's research has been in collaboration with the Royal Alberta Museum, and he has contributed to several galleries such as the Royal Tyrrell Museum. Rob is currently a professor at the University of Okanagan, the UBC Okanagan campus. And so many of you have probably interacted with Rob, and you may have a photo or two, or maybe even had your face photo taken of you with your mouth in the mouth of a short-nosed bear, I believe it was, Rob. And if not, you can look up Julie's because there's one of her floating around. So on that note, and without further ado, it is my honor to welcome back our great friend, Dr. Robert Young, who will be presenting The Way In, a reevaluation of terrestrial routes into the Americas for the First Peoples. Good evening, Rob. Great to have you back.
Good evening. Yes. Hi, Chris. You know, it's always a pleasure to interact with your group. It's a great facility that you have there in Kamloops that I'm envious of, you know, where you can bring citizen scientists and professionals together and just the general interested public. So and so many interesting topics on your list this year for your talk series. So I know I'll be back a few more times. I caught that cave one a couple weeks ago, and I'll tell you, I almost lost sleep over it. But would you like me just to carry on?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Let's let you carry on. You can start your presentation. And for those that don't know, keep your notepad ready, because at the end there's a special drop for a special talk from Rob tomorrow online, and we'll talk about that at the end here.
That's right. Yeah. So actually, I was asked to do this kind of at the last minute, but it really worked for me. Relates to getting people into the Americas, First Peoples into the Americas, and the timing of that. And I like this type of project because it shows the deep history, the prehistory of the First Peoples in the Americas. So although it is a bit of a challenging discipline that we have to use a lot of critical thinking about, but the ultimate result has been to, as I say, deepen our knowledge of the people's attachment to the landscape. So let me just reassure you that is absolutely central to a lot of what we do. Now we're going to be looking at how people got into the Americas using my research, looking at my research and examine that and see how it either supports or contradicts a lot of popular ideas Okay, and so I'm going to see if I can get this thing to go forward. There we go. Now, I just want to take a brief moment to recognize Dan Ryder, a friend of our department here we lost just before Christmas. He was a philosopher, and he gave a philosopher of science, and he gives a really good talk that made us reflect a lot on the topic was when are scientists irrational? And of course, we all want to be thinking that we're rational, but you know, we all have irrational parts in our lives, and but scientists really can't afford to do that. We have too many parts of our life where we have to obey the data and not carry on with an idea that is past its prime. And I think that we're going to be looking at one of those ideas right now. Okay, I've been very fortunate to work with a number of museums, the Royal Alberta Museum, the new campus downtown, at the galleries are largely populated with representations of fossils that were found as part of my PhD research, and also been very lucky to be a guest curator at the Royal Tyrrell Museum and the Quaternary Gallery there. And that largely has been renovated, but this part remains. Okay, so and this part as well with Ice Age prairie dogs. You think of cave gophers that they should be having long fangs, but no, this is a fascinating project that is absolutely germane to the topic of the peopling of the Americas. And I'll bring those links forward to you. I know that you're going to have a hard time buying it right now, but trust me, okay? I managed to work with the Kelowna Heritage Museum too, and this is their gallery person, Amanda. So I've worked with a number of other museums, and so public education is very, very important to me, and that's why I'm here. um, Now, when we look at the popular ideas about how people got here and what they were doing, the culture, the very common idea is that there was something called Clovis representing a spear point found in New Mexico, and that uh, these are commonly thought to have been the first peoples into the Americas. Okay, and the Clovis first and the concept of the ice-free corridor, being conceptually, okay, literally a corridor between two continent-sized glaciers. And so the idea is that the first humans got into the Americas with their particular spear point called Clovis, and they came down the ice-free corridor and between two walls of ice. And this is, you know, gives you some evocative mental imagery. It's a lot like, you know, Moses carrying the tablets, you know, across the Dead Sea. All right, so that is an idea that has been embraced and held and nurtured for decades, and radically defended, and now increasingly there's evidence that this idea is incorrect, and so my own research bears upon this. Okay, so here is a nice picture from National Geographic, a number of Clovis points. Okay, the points are known because they have these fluted ends that would fit, would be hafted at the end of a spear. And in many cases, they're actually maybe too big to be practical, and they would have maybe an ornamental or ceremonial significance. Okay, so Clovis, and about 10,000 years ago, this type of point just fades away and never returns. Okay, now the theory goes, and this is from Tony Sutcliffe's book, In Search of Ice Age Mammals, okay, Anthony Sutcliffe's, and I recommend it. It's a good read and gives you a lot of background on the disciplines related to looking for Ice Age mammals. But the idea is that Clovis people came through a minimal or non-glaciated area, okay, through the Edmonton area, because everybody knows that Edmonton is the center of the universe, and expanded out across the Americas in a killing wave and destroyed all of the megafauna and made them go extinct as they advanced across the continents and into South America. And so the idea is that this is literally, these people would almost be lining up and just killing everything, poking them to death with their spear points as they go along. And well, of course, everybody wants to get out of Edmonton, so I guess that one part wouldn't have been surprising in this model. But the idea is that there was an overkill, Pleistocene overkill hypothesis. But and many books have been written on this, and people form computer models and get the results that they want, and etc. But this is what an actual overkill looks like. Okay, in this case, it took 50 caliber guns and mechanized transport to wipe out the 50 or 60 million bison that were in the Americas. Okay, so this was an overkill, partly economic, but partly, genocide. Take away people's foodstuffs. Guess what? Okay, now the difference here being that the Pleistocene was dominated by horses. There were bison here, but our research shows that horses numbered 5 to 10 times more than bison at the time. So we take an equivalent limb element and do a demographic reconstruction, and so there were about 5 species of horses. Equus giganteus was probably bigger than your biggest thing that would be hauling beer kegs around. Okay, Equus conversidens, lami, and francisci. Also, there's Equus harringtoni. I don't have that one here. Okay, now interesting that a number of Clovis sites have been found, but this one found in 2014 just blew me away because it was found in first off, it was 13,390 years before present, or quite a bit older than other Clovis sites, which are in the 12,000 year range. Okay, number one. Number two, it was a kill site for something called a Gomphotherium, which is Gomphotheriums got into the Americas about 10 million years ago, maybe in the latter part of the Miocene, and evolved into quite a few different forms, one of which was mastodons. But it was widely recognized that they had gone extinct at the end of the Tertiary. So this thing pops up 2 million years, showing a persisted 2 million years longer than previously thought, number one. But number two, gives us, I think, or very close to the oldest Clovis dated site. So here's a picture of a Gomphotherium skeleton in the old gallery at the Royal Tyrrell Museum. And you can see that they have 4 tusks quite often, and the teeth are very similar to mastodons. And so the relationship was easy to come up with. But the interesting thing about Clovis bison, and it's been known for a long time, is that the oldest specimens are down in the American Southwest. Okay, and as you go farther north, the sites become younger and younger, and as they do going south. And so, for those who are thinking critically about these things, you can maybe assume that this is some sort of technological innovation that simply spread around, and as maybe a good killing tool for megafauna, but definitely suggests that people were there first, and then Clovis came after. Okay, so that's one of the lines of evidence that we can sort of use to kind of critique the Clovis first idea. Okay, now what about looking at the glacial record? And this is really where I've spent a lot of my years and time and energies and interests, okay, trying to reconstruct Pleistocene ice sheets. I've been lucky to work on all the Pleistocene megafauna sites, but really I was using the sites to guide me to the sedimentology and stratigraphy, ice age stratigraphy, to reconstruct the glacial environments. Okay, and so that's our business of today. So we can note the observed and reconstructed ice sheet profiles of each. Now, so many people have worked on the problem of the purported ice-free corridor. This is just a short selection of them. Who, first off, series of maps by people who felt that there was an ice-free corridor with minimal or little glaciation that people would have been able to migrate through. Okay. Nat Rudder and U of A had legions of graduate students. Barney Reeves, an important archaeological consultant in Calgary. Bob Fulton, who's retired in the Valley, found this recollection. I don't know why those oriented streamline forms are like that. Norm Cato and now Newfoundland and Carol Mandrick, based on some questionable radiocarbon dating, could go into it, felt that the terminal ends of the Cordilleran and Laurentide ice sheet in the last glacial maximum would have allowed for an ice-free corridor to have existed. Okay, so there are all sorts of geological surveys of provinces and nationally and universities and graduate student programs, many of whom worked on this problem. On the other hand, Art Dyke at the Geological Survey of Canada and Bruce Rains largely working on the same database. Okay, everybody's looking at the same thing and coming up with a slightly different interpretation or conclusion. There's nothing really significantly different to tilt the interpretations in one direction or the other. Nothing happened for a long, long time, decades. A lot of vitriol, okay, and I gotta say, you know, unpleasantness prevailed through the discipline. Okay, now we got to remember though that these ice sheets are three-dimensional bodies, okay, and so this is a reconstruction of the thickness of ice sheets roughly 21,000 years ago, compared with modern skylines. Over a meter deep in Boston, almost a meter in Chicago, 2 meters in Toronto. Okay, and we have to also realize when we're looking at ice sheets, they are responsive to their thermodynamic regime that exists where they when they exist as well. So we see observations of the observed Greenland profile and the observed Antarctic profile as you go down to the toe of it and walk up the front surface, okay? And then realize that the Laurentide ice sheet was like a pancake relative to these, you know, angel food cakes. So I'm getting hungry. But it was almost flat compared to the Greenland and Antarctic profile, and not comparable at all due to the differing thermal regimes. Okay, the warmer ice can be 10 times more easily deformed. Okay, number one, the ice at that temperature is far more likely to have a lubricating sheet of water at its base. So the friction is very low and the viscosity is very low compared to the observed Antarctic and Greenland profiles. Okay, so you can't compare these ice sheets, right? And I'll give you more of a reconstruction of what was going on. So if we look at the Laurentide ice sheet, originating, you know, the part that comes west originating around Hudson Bay, it shifts around a little bit, but the ice has to be thick, okay, to press down and push ice uphill from approximately 150 meters below sea level to 1.5 kilometers above sea level. Oops. And that the only way that that can happen is that you have a good thick dome of ice. I mean, it's flat compared to Antarctica, I'll tell you, but you still need at least 3 kilometers of ice to overcome the internal friction of the ice and the surface friction of the landscape that it goes over. Now, it comes from that area and goes right uphill and carries with it clasts and boulders from the Canadian Shield and deposits them around the landscape. So we can trace the limits of the ice sheet by looking at the lithologies of the deposits. And a lot of you people, of course, are interested in till mineralogy to look for mineral plays. Now, when glaciation was first understood to have occurred, it was Louis Agassiz, but and in Europe they recognized the possibility of maybe 4 glacial, non-glacial intervals. Okay, so the Ice Age, Pleistocene Ice Age, wasn't a period of the ice came, hung around for a couple million years, and then went away. No, it's long been known that there were long periods of interglacials between these glacial events, and these glacial events are mapped and named according to the reported or terminal ends. Okay, and so they wouldn't necessarily all have the same extent, and they would have different terminal points. So we have the Nebraskan, Kansas, Illinois, and Wisconsin, early and late Wisconsin. Okay, so and this was, again, kind of dogma for a long, long time. They would have the interglacials, and so they had the dogma of the 4-fold glaciations in Europe, and so respecting geologists would come to North America and have, feel a little obliged to find 4-fold glacial, non-glacial cycles. But all of this flew apart in the 1970s when Shackleton and Opdyke plunged took some cores out of the marine sediments and found that there was variations in the oxygen isotope content of the marine sediments, basically in the shells. So what's going on here is that oxygen exists in a few different stable isotopes. O16 is normal oxygen, but some of them have an extra couple of protons, O18. Now, when water evaporates, O16, the lighter water, evaporates, H2O16, preferentially. Okay. And when there's a glacier building on land, it is stored on land, and meaning that the O18 in the ocean water increases in concentration. And so the little critters floating around there making shell material out of calcium carbonate would incorporate increased amount of O18 in their shells, and then they die and float to the bottom and leave a layer of O18 enriched sediment, indicating there's ice on land. Now, there's so much ice on land that up to about 400 feet of global sea level occurred during the major glaciations. Like that's an enormous amount, basically a 40-story building. Okay, and here's just a higher resolution oxygen isotope core going back only to 600,000 years ago. But you can see that the isotope ratios of O18 increase and decrease, okay, with cold and warm periods. Now, it's interpreted to mean cold and warm periods, but I kind of contest that fact, because when we have an ice age, we have to have 2 conditions. One is an increased transport of winter precipitation to the interior parts of the continent, okay? And you don't do that if you're thinking that the ice age is desperately cold, okay? You need to keep your moisture transportation going. Think of, atmospheric rivers. BCers are familiar with that concept, except in Kamloops where it never rains. Sorry, Chris. But it has to go decade after decade. You need these atmospheric rivers of snow transport into forming an ice sheet. So you need winters that aren't necessarily that cold, okay? But also in the summer, you have to decrease the melt regime. So the summers cannot be very hot. So you end up with probably climates that are have subdued seasonality. And that would be absolutely necessary to form these ice sheets. Almost lickety split. Now, think of it though, that they just pulled like a 2-million-year-old ice core out of Antarctica, and that place has been glaciated continuously for a couple million years. Here we're talking about glaciers coming and going, roughly 20 times in the last 2 million years. Okay, almost every 100,000 years. Okay, and the idea is that they have been correlated to Milankovitch cycles related to Earth's orbital parameters, and three major Earth orbital parameters: the eccentricity of the orbit, is it circular or more oblong? Is the tilt of the Earth's axis involved? Okay, if we tilt more to the sun, then the seasons increase. If we tilt more vertically, then the seasons decrease. And we get the precession of the equinoxes. Basically, if you played with a top, you'd know that the thing wobbles, okay? And so we are in a situation right now where we are in our winter state, okay, where the northern hemisphere is pointed away from the sun, and that, almost contradictory to that is the idea that we are closest to the sun on January 4th. And in our summer, we are farthest away. Those situations change as well. Okay, so this would tend to increase the effects of winter and summer. So all of these come to play in a grand rhythm to form glacial and non-glacial cycles using these Milankovitch cycles. Okay, Milankovitch was a Serbian mathematician, and there's a rumor that he figured a lot of this out when he was in the First World War, a prisoner of war camp, and he was on the wrong side, I guess. But other stories contradict that, but it's a good one. So there we have it. The Laurentide ice sheet was really small when it was at its maximum, really low elevation when it at its maximum. Never was a big, thick one like the observed Greenland and Antarctic profile. So if don't compare these things. They're tortoise and hare only begin to describe what the difference is in this case. Okay, and that also, the Laurentide ice sheet just comes and goes. It's like when a 3-year-old figures out how to run the light switch uh, in a room and goes off and on and off and on. Yeah, that's really a good analogy for ice sheets. Now, one thing you should realize is that when we look at the next few images, is that the ice sheet, when you get glaciation, it isn't like a tide coming in and a tide going out. Ice sheets have very different coverage, okay? And it's simply because they are at different thermal regimes. And so you can get equal volumes of ice, but very different geometries of the ice sheet as well, okay? So you can get this dark blue ice sheet could exist in a colder condition, but it wouldn't cover as much area as its lighter green ice sheet, which is more widespread, but could have existed in a warmer thermal regime. Okay, so the volume and extent aren't necessarily linked. Okay, so here we have my summary diagram of a couple major workers who tried to figure out the ice sheet histories out on the prairies. Richmond and Fullerton, United States Geological Survey, long time workers out on the prairies, and the histories that they reconstruct with things coming from the left are from the Rocky Mountain glaciers, and from the right, from the Laurentide, from the inner part of the continent, and expanding out across the prairies. Now, Klassen here, Fulton, a number of other workers at the Geological Survey of Canada would have this reconstruction, okay, with a Albertan till being a Rocky Mountain till, Maycroft, Ernst, like that. But no glacier from the Cordillera coming out for this long time, from about 50,000 years to modern times. So no ice, i.e., yes, ice-free corridor in their reconstruction. And on the other side, the continental ice sheet, Labuma, Brockett, Monsell, Cameron Ranch, and finally the Buffalo Lake Till. So these guys could get together and on the Buffalo Lake Till from the last glaciation, but vary greatly on whether there was a Cordilleran ice sheet coming out to meet it and close off the ice-free corridor. Okay, so there's disagreement over reconstructions, even over the last glaciation. Okay, so you wanted some new data. Okay, so here's my master's thesis. I got to work on some Middle Wisconsin fossil prairie dogs. Okay, the prairie dogs raise their head here, okay? And so we are in the Hand Hills, northeast of Drumheller. And the hills are roughly described by this this topographic elevation about 3,000 feet above sea level. And a lot of sites where we dag the prairie dogs are noted here. Okay, so for perspective, here's my big foot, and I'm looking across what would have been the purported ice-free corridor and seeing the Rocky Mountains out here a couple 100 kilometers away. Okay, it's a good spot to stand up and look around, and also a good spot to be up there and look for meteorites. So this is the site, one of the sites, okay, and the main one in the Doug Winters property. And as a geographer, my job was actually mapping the sites. And what we're actually doing is digging up gopher holes, okay, and pulling out these things and taking out the bones, thousands and thousands of bones of an ice age prairie dog. Okay, prairie dogs don't exist on the prairies, and this is more closely related to a variety found in New Mexico. Okay, and it's, I think, statistically the largest prairie dog of all time. So that seems to fit. Ice age gigantism even went down to the level of prairie dogs. Okay. Of course, digging burrows isn't anything new. This was in the 1870s, and they discovered something called Demonalix, the devil's corkscrews, and so that was a fascinating project. Turned out to be some sort of Miocene beaver. But anyhow, the Terrestrial Museum created I thought, quite a nice display of the Ice Age prairie dogs, and it was part of their gallery for a good long time. But it has gone away. I got the only photo credit for the whole museum there, which was fun. But the reconstruction was there, and it looked a lot like actually being in a gravel pit with the prairie dog fossils and the burrows. Okay. Now, what's different here is that we did do a number of radiocarbon dates. Okay, radiocarbon dating is something, it's a great tool. You have to know how to use it. In this case, we're doing bone collagen radiocarbon dates. You don't do bulk dates on bone. Bone is the mineral fraction is very easily contaminated with other organics. So you extract basically the jello from the bone. You just put it in an acid bath, and you're just left with the jello. And the minute that stuff gets contaminated, it's no longer bone jello. It just leaves the system. So we used an accelerator mass spectrometers because only very small samples are needed to get very, very high resolution radiocarbon dates and stuff. I mean, they test this. And so the deal is we had one sample with a very poor yield of bone collagen. It turned out a date that was sort of spurious, but most of them were in the 22,000 to 33,000 year range. So this is remarkable because you have giant prairie dogs living up until about 22,000 radiocarbon years before present. Calibrated dates a couple thousand years older. And then some of our colleagues got hold of the dates without us providing the geological context. And so they said, look, you've got Ice Age prairie dogs out there in the ice-free corridor. This proves the ice-free corridor. Well, in actual fact, the opposite was true. Okay, and let me show you why. Because number one, the prairie dog fossils were found underneath glacial material. Okay, and so they were living there, and then their sites were covered. Okay, and the hilltop is 600 feet above the prairie, so the hills had to be the ice sheet had to be good and thick to go up and over top of this hill. And it didn't just go up and over top of the hill, it actually blended the sediments and deformed it and contained the bones. Okay, here's an Ice Age fossil bone, but you can see the soft sediment deformation caused by glaciers overriding the sediment on top of the hill. Okay, now this gave us a number of oriented clasts, basically the clasts weather vane, and show the direction of deformation. And so we could not only get the stratigraphic signal, but we could see what direction the ice sheet was moving on top of the hill, hundreds of feet above the prairies, okay? And that the ice was on top of the hill, completely submerged this site by maybe a 300-400 meters, okay? And it was flowing, and the whole intervening area would have been also very full of ice during the time that people would be wanting there to be no ice in order to support the idea of an ice-free corridor. So ice in the ice-free corridor is a no-no, and it was very deep and very active. Okay, and so here's a digital elevation model made by my pal Darren at the University of Calgary. Okay, and showing the stereograms of the indicating the direction of flow of the ice over top. And so this is our reconstruction handhills here. Okay, all of the other reconstructions just sort of have the ice sheets kind of just pulling up to a position in front of the front ranges. But no, what likely had to happen is that the ice came, it was full of gusto, and it ran into cordilleran ice and was deflected, okay, to the southeast. So this was not a passive sort of little two-dimensional exercise of drawing a horizontal line. This ice was deep, it was dynamic, and it filled the area of the purported ice-free corridor. That's the start of this. Okay, well, what's next? And so I was in the lab working on my then master's thesis, and I was looking at the gravel pits around Edmonton, and it was full of Saskatchewan gravels. Okay, and this is called Saskatchewan gravels because they're largely thought to have been pre-glacial in age, meaning they didn't contain any clasts from the igneous and metamorphic areas of the Canadian Shield that would have been transported by Laurentide ice uphill and then deposited. You could see the stuff, boulders all over the, the post-glacial landscape, but there's none of it in these pre-glacial gravels and a number of outcrops, and even the first geologist to go across Canada, Dawson McConnell, reported that these gravels were pre-glacial. Okay. Well, what does pre-glacial mean? Okay, they are pre-glacial by lithostratigraphy, but we have different reconstructions by, have given us by the varying workers. And so Class and Fulton, et cetera, thought they could be as old as 500,000 years ago. Okay, so no glaciation from the Laurentide, okay, by 500,000 years. And the American side, it was 900 to 1,000,000 years. Okay, so this is pre-glacial. So how old were these gravels? That's a lot of variability. It's 500,000 years just on the get-go. Okay, so we have, I think, solved the issue of the extent of the late Wisconsin ice during the time of the purported ice-free corridor. Let's look at the Saskatchewan gravels. Okay, the gravels are deposited in the ancient riverbeds across the prairies, indicated by the thicker gray lines, okay, and that the ice came across and deflected, okay, well, completely stopped the flow. But as the post-glacial rivers were established, they were often established in the one drainage south, the Calgary River into the South Saskatchewan, and the Red Deer River into the Bow River pre-glacial valley. And in the case of the Peace and rivers to the north, they were deflected north, and the Milk River was deflected south into the Missouri. So here we are in beautiful Edmonton again, not necessarily trying to leave. It's kind of pretty in the summer. And here we are again in one of these pre-glacial valleys. Okay, and there are a number of them around the city of Edmonton. This is absolutely fabulous mineral resource. I think 4 or 5 in the province at least. It's beautiful quartzite gravel and used in building, and around the corner there was a placer operation, and I was in the pit one day, and I sort of looking around for bones, and not finding a darn thing because they're so diffuse. Anyway, I walked up to the placer outfit. And I asked the guy, I said, how much money are you getting out of this thing? And he looked at me and he said, well, I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you. And I said, well, ignorance is bliss, and went on my way unharmed. But this is my friend Tim Showalter, who's a fabulous natural historian, and found the prairie dogs initially, and I think he found his first T-Rex about 55 years ago. So Tim's a great guy and a super generous scientist and natural historian. Anyway, so we're looking at these things, these deposits, as being members of the Saskatchewan Gravels group, okay? And they're very, very old. So some madman said, well, number one, let's see what we can do about increasing the collections from here. So we went to the gravel pit companies and said, look, we find some things, we'll help you with your end of the year environmental assessment, and tell them what good guys you are and they'll help you fly through it. Because the companies are just petrified that if we find anything, we'll shut it down and start some sort of archaeological digging. No, if you guys aren't pushing the stuff through the grizzlies, we're not going to find anything. So, we want to keep this going. And so, this fella in the black shirt, he's out there watching the material come through, and he's pulling off clay because it gums up the crusher. Okay. And so, it's not a nice job. He's sitting there getting vibrated for 10 hours a day in the hot sun. And so our volunteers go out and, suddenly he starts finding bones. Okay. But while he's finding bones, he's pulling clay off as well, helping out this guy. And this guy sees what's going on. And suddenly he's got an interest in life other than just pulling clay. And so he's, fully on board with finding stuff and passing it along, and something new to pick up with his, on the rest of his life. And so our volunteers and paid staff would go around and train a number of these guys. And so what happened is that in one pit, I think we were getting like 1 or 2 fossils a year. We ended up with 3,000, and it was and it's turned out to be the most fossiliferous sites in glaciated North America. I mean, Grand Zazzle is on top of a great resource up there, but that wasn't glaciated. So, we had to find our own sites, number one, and number two is it's pretty damn amazing as well. So this is the same element, okay, of generally speaking, the same species, same type of animal. And you can see that some of these bones are quite rugose and some of them are quite gracile, and they are all of Pleistocene horse. And so I'm going to go over this megafauna tomorrow in my talk, and given Julie the particulars, and it'll be held tomorrow at 11 a.m. here in Sci 374 on UBCO's campus. And we'll be able to put it out to you on the Zoom, but I'm afraid that UBCO's a little weird about recording things unless people become identified. So it's a FOIP. Okay. And bison, of course, and the bison story is very interesting, and bison latifrons and the 3 extant bison here. And I'm going to go through as I say, the megafauna in far more detail tomorrow, because the name of that game is to try to reconstruct what the life of the first humans would have been in terms of what they would have lived with. Okay, not nice stuff in many cases. So this is a femur, of course, and showing it next to a person who's, admittedly a little bit altitudinally challenged, but what a darling cow with a great sense of humor. Also teeth. Okay. Mammoths can be speciated according to the number of plates per 10 centimeters. Okay, and this is actually a mandible from the Grand Prairie area, and that mandible here compared to an Asian elephant. Okay, so you can see the degree of relatedness based on the dentition in this case. And the Asian elephants are far more closely related to mammoths than they are to the 2 main varieties of African elephants. Okay. Just to give an idea what's there. We've got the woolly mammoths here, the smallest, the African mammoth elephants here, and the Trogontheriae, the first mammoths into the Americas. that evolved into the Columbian mammoths. Okay, and it's a Columbian mammoth fossil site. And I'll just, give you a brief commercial message here for the fossil site in Hot Springs, South Dakota, where they discovered this fabulous mammoth site, and they managed to get together and throw a roof over it, and they're digging down through the sediments, and you can volunteer and become go out there and dig some mammoths yourself. And they're down 22 feet into the deposit, and there's another 44 feet going. And the fun part of the demographics is that they're mostly Columbian mammoths, 70% or so, 30% woolies, but they're all teenage males, and that's interesting. So and so also from our gravel pits we get mastodon. Okay, so we know that they're in that area, two types of mammoths, but also mastodon. So also there are gomphotheres in the Americas. So we have this four elephant-like things. Okay, the gomphotheres and the mastodons are not very closely related to the mammoths and elephants, but what we've got there is a fine case for convergent evolution. So that's a great topic I address time and again in my historical geology classes. Camels, like horses, originated in the Americas, and so we got a nice camel bone, and then they migrated north or to the Old World and also to South America, where we got guanacos and vicuñas that have been bred into domestic stock llamas, and those fuzzy things. Okay, so we have the rivers showing the deflection to the north, the south. Let's talk about what else was here, and this is maybe a more stimulating. We have the paleo diet, and we can have the paleo workout. So this will be an area that I'll look at in depth tomorrow, and we look at the Ice Age super predators. Okay, and I think first and foremost is the North American lion, up to 450 kilograms. Okay, so what's that? 1,100 pounds, very close. And even larger fossils have been found since this reconstruction was made. And then the African lions, far smaller, and giant short-faced bears. Okay, so I won't go into those too much today, but let's just say there are a couple of other cats of interest. Okay, and here's just a DNA map of North American lions compared to Beringian lions, compared to the Eurasian cave lion and Leo. Now, okay, the sediments are pre-glacial. What does that mean? It means there has been no glaciation in the area until those until the sediments were deposited. So the sediment should be 500,000, a million years old. Well, I was a bit crazy, but I said, we've got access to the radiocarbon lab in Vegreville, so let's just start firing specimens at them. And this is the radiocarbon list. Okay, so these bones are actually within the range of radiocarbon dating. Okay, this shouldn't happen. These bones should be far too old for radiocarbon dating. And so we did all sorts of things in terms of independent cross checks with other labs and multiple dates on same specimens and different treatments, and just to verify what was going to be a very controversial result. Okay, and so this is probably more radiocarbon dates than several careers of various research intensive geologists would have done, and all of their grad students. Okay, so this would represent the careers of maybe a 10 or more other quaternary geologists in the area, showing that pre-glacial means that it was 40,000, 20,000 years old. There was no glaciation before then. The last glaciation, okay, there is some older deposits, certainly, but the last glaciation held these bones, indicating it was as young as maybe 22,000 years old. But the last glaciation was the only one to come across from the Laurentide side and coalesce with the Cordilleran side. So the last one wasn't just the most extensive in the Western Interior, it was the only one, okay? And so the ice-free corridor was the only time that there wasn't a corridor, okay? There certainly was, the area was wide open and full of megafauna up until the time at which the ice-free corridor was supposed to be closed. It was 180 degrees out of phase with the results we're looking at. And, not only that, we look at biostratigraphic dating. Bison don't get here till a couple 100,000 years ago. It's considerably younger than 500,000 years, and Mammuthus, the woolly mammoth, about the same time. Okay, so the Rancho-Librian ages, and so the biostratigraphy supports the radiocarbon dating, and also none of the sediments out in the prairies are giving us any kind of a reading for paleomagnetic reversals that would suggest it's older. Okay, that's all paleomagnetically normal, okay, and younger than that time. And so I'm just going to, I think, wind up this part of the talk with the idea that one of the problems of the Clovis first hypothesis is that researchers were actually kind of intimidated to look for sites that were older. Okay, you hear stories of sites, say in Virginia or something, that people dig down, they get down to the Clovis level, and their granting agency just doesn't really want them to dig any further. Okay, so geopolitical games do get played in academia and geology and all sorts of fields, and so we have to be diligent and know what's going on, but also in terms of the researchers, they have to realize that at some point their position becomes insupportable, and yet if they keep supporting it, they do so at the risk of seeming irrational. Okay, and so with that, I'll wind up. I have no idea what time it is at this point. Okay, well, looks like we did it in good time, so I'll just stop there.
Wow. Rob, every time you come on, we always, I always have more questions. And thanks for presenting that. It's interesting. So when was that radiocarbon dating done? So was it in the 90s?
Yeah, largely it was, and it's still being done. I think there's an Oxford group that's been coming in and doing DNA, and I actually there was a group that just released a paper on the mastodon stuff like last week, and they showed that there are actually two types of mastodons, and they do the DNA study on the mastodon. So the work in the DNA and further higher resolution radiocarbon dating on that deposit continues, because, as I say, it's got no equal in glaciated North America. So, happy to discover it. I wish they'd write me in a couple of grants and publications, though.
So is there opportunity to resample with newer, like obviously the radiocarbon dating's gotten more precise. It's only gotten better. Is there opportunity to resample some of those samples, or is that something?
Oh yeah, they're really down for it. It's there. The door is open. Yeah. And oh yeah, I mean, get guys like Tom Stafford who will not only go after bone collagen, he'll go after amino acids that are specific to vertebrates. Okay, and he'll spin it in his little centrifuge and get the specific amino acids. So, and also DNA extractions. As I say, I've just got this paper just this last week on the DNA of mastodons. And Chris Jass is sort of ostensibly the curator there. He kind of is also working at the Mammoth site in South Dakota. I haven't talked to him in years. I don't know what the heck he's doing with his life. So, but the door is open to research, that's for sure. If you got a few bucks and got a good research proposal.
I work for the government. I don't have a few dollars extra. Um, hey, everybody that's watching, I just wanted to let you know that we have posted Rob's information for his talk tomorrow. You can find it on our Facebook page, and it's also listed on the under January events on the KEG website. The KEG website. So yeah,
Thank you
please
so
feel
much.
free to look.
Yeah, and I'll said it before, I say it again. The Kamloops Exploration Group is just a superb group. We're very lucky in Kamloops to have them there, and I'm happy to support you any way I can, except with cash.
Yeah, we're both there. It's we're blessed. I think as the Countless Exploration Group, we have great speakers, we have great guests, and we have a great following, yourself included, Rob. And we've got a few questions coming in, so we can move on to some of those. I see one here is talking about do glacial periods correlate at all with the magnetic pole reversals?
No, that's that.
Simple
Not
answer.
unindicated, but correlation with Milankovitch is really interesting because it goes on one part of the record for the last couple million years. It goes in the 100,000 year cycles, and then suddenly it switches over to the 41,000 year cycles. So that you could do a Google Scholar search. Okay, I mean that's one of the ways that you can get around a lot of nonsense on the internet is go through Google Scholar. Mm.
Good to know. As the ice-free corridor did not exist, when and how did the first peoples enter the Americas?
Oh, I should have wrapped that up a little more clearly, and I apologize. But the place was ice free 24,000 plus years, and so they were footloose and fancy free to go through there. It's just that the ice free corridor model requires this time when there's supposedly glacial maximum that the first humans and indeed other animals came through, like Moses parting the Red Sea, carrying their Clovis point in front of them. That is the part that we're kind of dealing with critically here. But my gosh, it was ice free, megafauna all over the place. At least 5 species of horse. The bison are late entrants, and actually, the horses outnumbered the bison almost 10 to 1. And so it was a horse-dominated fauna. And you just think of it like gazelles or something like that. There's so many species once they are well established, and they're occupying all sorts of ecological niches. So fantastic environment for proboscideans. Okay, 4 elephants. This blows Africa out of the water. Okay, on the one hand, but also wait till you get hold of my talk tomorrow, and we look at some of the challenges that the first peoples would have had to face, and they would have had to be terribly, terribly tough and stout-hearted to persist in that environment.
Of course, if anybody has any other questions, feel free to throw them into the Q&A tab. Something I've been struggling with myself, and I must admit, I think there's been some, I think I had heard something recently of some dating that had come out in South America, some early human dating, or it was something. And anyways, it made me think about some of the dates and the stuff you were showing in one of your earlier slides. And I wonder internally, and this is just me hypothetical postulating, I wonder if through those phases of interglacial periods, like humans were around in Southeast Asia like 100,000 years ago, right? The Homo sapien. So it makes me wonder, like in these periods, would you easily could move over, and not that I say it would be easy, but
I saw a great picture of planet Earth recently from space, and from side to side it was pure water, and it was a picture of the Pacific Ocean. You couldn't, it is a water world, Pacific Ocean, and it is enormous. So yeah, the Polynesians did an incredible job of migrating from island to island, but that took a long time, and they didn't do it till fairly late.
yeah, like how did they get to Easter Island? That's a whole nother thing, right?
Oh yeah. I did read an article, but I could summarize it, but they could navigate out a certain ways, get to one point, and then they would see the birds fly over, and they would follow, and basically, I don't know, draw an X on the bottom of the boat so they could go. I don't know that, and follow. It's just year by year they could navigate and follow the migrating waterfowl to the next island.
Wow.
Is one idea. All right, I'm not going to live or die with that one.
It's postulation. Another question: were horses present in America when the Europeans arrived?
No,
So what happened to them?
they
So
went
there's a period, right?
they went
Sorry.
extinct. Yeah, no, the horses, camels, mammoths, giant short-faced bears, giant lions, saber-toothed cats, homotherium, gonzo, man. Yeah, not here.
So what's the theory on why they went extinct?
Oh, you want another talk, do you?
We always want another talk.
Yeah. Oh, that is a really the next compelling question in the discipline is what caused the Pleistocene extinctions. And of course, one of the ideas is just simply overkill with the Clovis people. They just felt that, I guess paleontologist named Paul Martin created a computer program that showed that they would stand, 10 abreast, and they would thrust and jab and make everything go extinct. And so the Pleistocene overkill hypothesis is well thought of in some circles. And Grant Zazula had a speaker up there less than 2 years ago supporting that idea. So that's one, okay? And so we can make a laundry list of potential mechanisms. The Younger Dryas, okay, period, where it looks like the Northern Hemisphere, near the end of the Ice Age, we're coming out of it, and suddenly there's, particularly the Northern Hemisphere, a drop in annual temperature by 14 degrees in 3 years. And so that is well documented from the ice sheets. Okay, so Younger Dryas, cold hypothesis, but what caused that? Okay, and so was it catastrophic flooding from melting glacial lakes? Was it cosmogenic? Did something fall down? And so there are supporters of both ideas there,
Mm.
like a comet or something like that hitting the ice sheet. And so actually, I could suggest a video called "The Last Extinction" on YouTube. Okay, and it's they make a case. Okay, and you can tell they might be getting close because the opposition is just wild. Okay, it's vicious, and so that's one the problem that I'll just grab some popcorn, sit back, see what happens. I got no skin in that game, but we should keep abreast. It's in our wheelhouse. So, but yeah, The Last Extinction.
Last.
YouTube search for that.
One last question squeaked in here. What happened to the Clovis people?
Well, it looks like they ended and they became, what's the name of the next spear point? They didn't necessarily go extinct, but some cultural changes in the Pleistocene megafauna went away, and so they had to hunt new things and came up with an easier spear point to make and different tools. So yeah, I don't think the aliens took them away.
On that note, for everybody, I'd like to remind you that Rob's got a talk tomorrow at 11 o'clock. It's in Kelowna if you're around. The room is Science Building 3-74.
374, yeah.
374.
Yeah, we serve Timbits.
Oh, and there's a free Timbit apparently. It'll be continuing, I think, off of some of the stuff we've talked about tonight. And we've posted all that information onto the KEG website under the January events, and also on our Facebook page. Julia's posted it. And to everybody tonight, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us, and of course, a huge thank you to our primary sponsor of the series, which is ALS, and to Rob Thanks, Dr. Rob. It's always great to have you around, Miss. And you know, you always inspire thoughts. And by the way, I've been meaning to say, we do get rain in Kamloops, so nice play.
Ooh,
Thanks
sick
again for
burn.
joining us for the series.
Okay,
Last
thanks
word.
a lot.
Our next talk will be a Zoom session, so it is online, and it will be February 13th with our guest speaker, Dr. Yannick Lemoyne, and they'll be presenting Chronology and Dynamics of Canada's Deadliest Volcanic Eruption, the 1700 Common Era eruption of the Sieux, hopefully I didn't do that too much damage, volcano from British Columbia. For more information about the KEG lecture series, please go to the KEG website at www.keg.bc.ca. And of course, we always look forward to comments and questions if anybody has any, and other feedback. And that can be, you can provide that to the Kamloops Exploration Group at gmail.com. So once again, don't forget about Rob's talk tomorrow at 11 on the Zoom. And on that note, huge thank you again to ALS, to Dr. Rob Young, and thanks to all of you for joining tonight. We look forward to seeing you on February 13th online for Chronology of and Dynamics of Canada's Deadliest Volcanic Eruption, the 1700 Common Era eruption of the Sieux volcano in British Columbia. Thanks all. Have a great night. Take care.